Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about identity security modernization and specifically three key things. One, how to coexist with traditional IAM and IGA solutions. When you can decide to re-engineer your identity technology stack, and with the overall goal of securing every identity. That may sound like panacea, but that's the goal. So with those three phrases describe the journey most organizations are on with identity security right now. Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have a good idea of where you are on that journey and what your next steps look like. And if you still don't, we're here to help. So I'm Frank Ray. I lead the identity security practice at Templar Shield. I have been in the identity space for over 24 years. Like I always say, don't do the math. But as an important context here, ServiceNow acquired VEZA. So when we talk about VEZA today, we're talking about a capability that is now part of the ServiceNow platform and the ServiceNow ecosystem. And to me, that's pretty exciting. I've been with Templar Shield for the past 4 years, building this identity security practice and being able to work in the platform with a solution like VEZA. It's very exciting. But today I also have joining me Justin Stevens and Zach Wilson from ServiceNow. Justin and Zach, if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Frank. Excited to be here. Justin Stevens. I've been in the identity security space for about 5 years, been at VEZA for about 1.5 years. And as part, like Frank alluded to, we came over as part of the VEZA acquisition here at ServiceNow. So looking forward to talking about VEZA, identity security, identity governance, and visibility today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Zach Wilson, Senior Advisory Solutions Consultant for ServiceNow. As Justin said, came over to ServiceNow and joined the ServiceNow team after the VEZA acquisition. I've got over 27 years dedicated cybersecurity experience. And the first 22 years were focused on the customer side, working for organizations of varying size across multiple industries. The last 5 years, I've been focused on enabling customers in the sales role. And I'm excited to show you what I feel is one of the most revolutionary technologies that you'll see in the market today that answers the question of who has access to what and what can they do with that access. So I'll turn it back over to you, Frank. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. And that's right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Templar Shield first for those that may not know who we are. We are a firm that has been in the security and risk space since 2013. We have completed over 400 identity IRM, security operations, and identity engagements across 100 plus Fortune 1000 clients. We are a strategic ServiceNow lead partner, and we cover advisory, consulting, technology enablement, and managed services for risk, security, and identity, and all of the service pillars around that. It's important to note that we are the Risk and Security Partner Award winner for 2026, and we've been on a lead partner for several years, specifically on the risk and security space. Identity security is one of our core practice areas and the one that I lead, so I'm a little biased on that. And we are seeing a lot of demand in this space because organizations are realizing identity is still a huge gap for most organizations. And most of the existing tools were not built to answer the question. I think this is what you were alluding to earlier too, Zach, is what can this identity actually do? You may be able to say, well, this identity has access to this group, it has access, but beyond that, at resource level, you may not know what an identity can actually do. So here's a breakdown for what we're going to talk about today. For the first few minutes, I'll talk about why this problem exists and why traditional identity governance and administration solutions cannot solve it alone. Then Justin will kick it off along with Zach, and it will give you a demo of VEZA in action. And then I'll come back and close it with what we call the identity security flight path, and I'll explain to you why. And two practical paths for how to act on what you've seen. And throughout this, we will run live polls that you can respond on, and you'll have a chance to weigh in on your opinion so give us some feedback. I really enjoy this slide. So this slide shows you exactly where ServiceNow is going as a platform, right? The server's cyber risk workflow concept connects 4 capability areas designed to work together, not as separate tools, as it is in most organizations today. So you have security operations, risk and compliance, IT/OT posture, which connects us to, which is another recent acquisition of ServiceNow, covering and managed device and OT visibility. But the fourth quadrant, managed authorization, is where we're going to talk about today. That's where ServiceNow VEZA lives. Non-human identity discovery, risk-based access reviews, access profile discovery. You'll see some of that today. But the key point is that VEZA is not a standalone tool. It is one pillar of connected risk workflow, and that context matters when deciding where to start. And you'll see that as we talk through some of this as well. But I want to start with some numbers from recent Verizon Data Breach Investigators report. You probably have seen that. This is not necessarily a vendor set of statistics, but this is a report that came out from Verizon Data Breach. And 22% of breaches involve credential abuse. That's all breaches in general, right? 22% of them involve credential abuse. 88% of web attacks use stolen credentials. That's staggering number. And here's one that hits home a lot, especially working in the industry as well. Machine identities already outnumber humans 80-1. That's service accounts, cloud roles, AI agents, right? 80-1. Most organizations have no idea what those identities can actually do. And that's the question we're trying to answer, right? But I want to talk a little bit about some of the problem areas. And I'll start with a definition of effective permissions, because I think sometimes that's a little misunderstood. So what is an effective permission? Effective permission is the actual security permissions that a user, a group, or a service account has on any given resource within an environment. So when we're saying that, we're saying is effective permissions is not necessarily a single entitlement, but it's what the permissions are granting down to the resource level throughout what's called the effective path, right? So for example, if you have an AD user group or an Azure AD group that is granting access to one or multiple S roles, and those S roles are granting access to a resource within AWS, you may be able to review with your traditional systems individual one of those entitlements, but you are not going to be able to see the full path, the effective permission itself. And that's what you're going to see today. So when we're looking at the blind spots that exist in almost every traditional program today, you have, as I mentioned, effective permissions, right? Group memberships does not reveal the downstream access. Cross-system trust chains. There's no single tool that can see a full escalation path from your SaaS to cloud to production, for example. And then, privilege escalation, right? The risk is the combination across platforms, not just the single entitlement. So this is the authorization visibility gap. That's what we call authorization visibility. And we feel that that's a huge gap that what we're going to show you, we hope you can see how you can close that gap today. So before I move on, I'd like to see where your organization stands. And I'm going to trigger a poll that's going to talk about a couple of things. So let me do that poll first, make sure I don't screw this up. So let's start with the first poll. All right, so I can see the stats, but I don't know if you can. So I'm going to kind of read it just so you guys have it, right? How well does your organization understand effective access during access reviews? And I just kind of explain what effective access is, right? So your options are review or see full effective permissions. That'd be great. Love to see that. And if you're one of those, I'd like to understand that. So then you have B, right, review or see role group assignment, but not effective access. I could see that being a good number of you. Then access reviews happen, but most approvals are rubber stamped. I probably think most of you fall in that space. And then we do not have a consistent access review process, and that's reality. So, but I'd love to talk to those today. So I'm going to keep going as those are being answered. So let's see. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Justin and we'll go from there. So Justin, up to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it. Yes, looking forward to our session here. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to hopefully get through, and I know everybody wants to see the demo, so I'll work through my piece here, and we can show you what the platform actually looks like and how you can leverage the platform to drive value around your identity access controls. But I'm just going to kind of walk through how our customers are leveraging VEZA today to promote more granular visibility and provide organizations with more risk insight to help drive their governance strategy and help move towards a more zero trust oriented identity security policy. So most, if not, a lot of the organizations that we work with have some form or fashion of an identity provider or even maybe a legacy IGA solution in place, which is fantastic. And like Zach alluded to earlier, we are not replacing your legacy IGA solutions necessarily, right? But we are providing another layer of visibility and granular risk insights for you to help move and govern your identity strategy off of. Like Frank alluded to earlier, credential breaches and identity-related incidents are becoming more and more prevalent. But today, people aren't like knocking down the front door. They're walking in because they got the key, right? And that's why it's more and more critical that we understand who has access to our keys, to our secrets, who has permissions to take action on our data within any given resource or application. That is the primary value that we can add alongside your legacy IGA solution. But along with that is the time to value. I'm sure many of you have had experience in deploying legacy IGA solutions in the past. And, we all know that those are very powerful tools. They absolutely promote additional security. They operate as a force multiplier within your environment, but they can be a pain to fully set up. And more often than not, it is not going to end up touching your entire application stack because it just takes too much time, too much money, too many resources to have that full coverage. Your typical IGA implementation can take anywhere from 9 months to 24 months and beyond, right? Whereas VEZA, being an API-driven platform with over 325 out-of-the-box connectors that you have access to, we can stand VEZA up in more than half that time, right? Many of the customers that we have see value within the first 2 weeks, and from a visibility and risk intelligence standpoint, have the connections that they want to make made, within the first 2 to 3 months. And so, Frank, we'll go to the next slide here. So what is like the difference here, right? Where is VEZA sitting alongside your legacy IGA tool, your identity provider, right? We're not asking or recommending that anybody displace what they're doing from a lifecycle management perspective. Like, it is critical, especially for larger organizations, that you automate the joiner, mover, leaver process within your organization. That is a necessary force multiplier to ensure that your security admins are spending their time focusing on things that are, more critical to the strategy, to the security strategy within your organization. Legacy IGA tools, the source of truth for legacy IGA tools is based on role-based access control, whereas VEZA takes an entitlement-centric perspective. We can absolutely provide you with visibility into what roles, what groups, and what roles your identities are associated with in your environment. But more critically, we're also providing you with visibility into, like Frank had mentioned earlier, what effective permissions those identities have within your environment at any given resource level. And we also do this not just for human identities, but we're providing you with the visibility and the access control risk insights for your non-human identities, your service accounts, your app pools, your keys, your secrets, as well as your AI agents and the bots that are now out there in all of our environments and have become very critical to a secure identity, security, and governance strategy. And like I had alluded to earlier, we are an API-driven platform. So we can make these out-of-the-box connections very quickly, but we also leverage an open authorization API tool so that we can build and connect to custom-built applications, maybe niche applications that are used very specifically in, specific verticals very quickly, very efficiently. So you're getting the same data that you would out of, your more highly used applications in your environment. Go ahead, Frank. So how do we do this, right? What does this look like? I kind of had mentioned it a second ago. Your classic identity provider, your classic identity governance administration solution is going to provide you with visibility down to the role-based access control level. And role-based access is important to an identity security strategy. Nobody is taking anything away from that. But what is also critical is understanding what action your users can take on your data at the resource level. And that is foundationally what VEZA is able to provide for you, right? So your classic identity security tool, IGA tool, might identify all the identities in your IDP. They're going to be able to show you what groups those identities are tied to based on their roles and based on their responsibilities, and what roles are associated with their responsibilities in the groups that they're associated with. What we do is we connect the VEZA platform to your application stack, whatever applications you want visibility into via API. We pull that authorization metadata from the downstream application resource into our platform, and we translate that metadata into natural CRUD effective permission nomenclature. So what can my identity create, read, write, update, or delete? So therein, you have full visibility into all of the actions that your identities can take on your data at any given resource level. And I'll show you what I mean by that here on the next slide, Frank. We'll move to the access graph here. So effectively, if you implemented VEZA, in your organization's environment, this is a kind of a snapshot of what the access graph could look like, right? Like I mentioned, so we're pulling the authorization metadata from your resources and translating that into effective permissions in our platform. So when I say resources, what do I mean, right? We can connect to your primary cloud service provider, your identity providers, your on-prem resources, your SaaS applications, your HRIS solution. As long as we can get an API in there, we can connect to it, right? But from there, we can also map to the resources within that application. So for example, if we knew that there was critical data, PII data in a specific Snowflake table, and we wanted to understand who has edit and delete permissions within this Snowflake table, we could go into the access graph, identify that Snowflake table, and map backwards, because this graph operates bidirectionally. We could map backwards and produce essentially what is a blast radius visibility standpoint for you to understand what human identities, what non-human identities, maybe what AI agents have the permission to edit or delete data in this specific Snowflake table. That's how granular we get. We can also get down to like an AWS S3 bucket, a ServiceNow table, a Salesforce account list, right? So it works both ways. But essentially what that is giving you is the auditability to determine, hey, our existing governance strategy, the solution that we have in place today, where we're deprovisioning access for employees that have left the company or employees that have moved on to a different responsibility or role, are their permissions actually adding up? Is it appropriate? Without a tool like VEZA that is going to provide you with the visibility into the effective permissions, the actions they can take on your data across your application stack, you really can't answer that question. So it's an incomplete picture from a governance standpoint. And that's what we help organizations do foundationally. And from there, right, we can query access reviews, we can remove permissions, right? And then Zach, I think you're going to actually show us here what that looks like in the platform.
Yes. Let me make sure I do this right. So I'm going to stop sharing, and you should be able to share now, Zach, and you can start your demo.
All right. Thank you all. Before we get started, I'm just going to set the stage, set the persona, if you will, and we'll dive into the use case. It's a use case that we hear, very frequently from our customers that we're talking to, and I'm sure that it may resonate with many of you listening today. So in this scenario, we have a developer that left the company 90 days ago. Okta was disabled, right? The initial access review came back clean for the user. However, before the user left, they stood up an AI agent for a pilot program they were working on, and nobody owns it, right? So let's jump into the access graph and a few of the other capabilities and walk through this. So what we're looking at here is an access graph related to the AI orchestration agent, right? And on paper, this is just a Bedrock agent, but let's watch what it can do, right? We see that we have an AIM role. That's normal. We see that it has access to secrets manager secrets. Again, this is normal, but these secrets are the RDS, the Redshift, the Postgres master passwords. And we put this together, and we have an unknown agent that's holding keys to your databases, right? Now, if we look at this at the top of the query, it kind of tells the story here. We've got one agent that has access to 407 resources, 274 secrets, right? And it's even got write and delete access to a table. In fact, that's the very table that governs access itself. And And we talk about effective permissions earlier. So what VEZA does is for all of these service endpoints, database tables, EC2s, S3 bucket, Azure storage blobs, across your service providers, across your custom applications, across your on-prem applications, we're going to look at those raw system permissions, and we're going to normalize those raw systems permissions into easy to understand CRUD nomenclature. So imagine having to look at all of these potential permissions, raw system permissions, to try to determine what is a delete action, what is a write action. So VEZA pulling all of that authorization metadata, including the permissions off of those resources, and then normalizing that into the access graph, it allows you to easily interact with the data. And you don't have to be an expert in all of the systems to ask a simple question and get an answer. Who can create, read, and write data into my sensitive tables? Okay. Next, we'll flip over to a dashboard that I've created. And what I want to highlight here is, it's not just one agent. It's 870 agents. It's hundreds of AI agents. Nobody owns them. And we see here that 3 of them actually can read the credentials and write data into Postgres databases or other resources, right? Now, VEZA didn't just find this. When it discovered this ownerless AI agents with toxic access combinations, it automatically created a ServiceNow incident ticket for me, right? It created and filed that incident. And you can see here in that incident, we'll have a nice description of the issue, right? We found 3 agent versions that had, access to sensitive information, privileged access and with toxic access combinations, all right? Now, let's flip over to the access review capability and look at the other half of the decision. So we automatically took that query and we turned it into an access review. So what I'm looking at here is I've got, and I'll expand all these, I've got 9 rows, right? 1 question. Which AI agents can read our database master credentials? All the same agent, the AI orchestration agent across the 3 versions that you can see, right? So this is inappropriate access. No human owns this agent. It's never held access to these database keys. So I'm going to go in and reject and sign off on all of these. So I will go through here and reject. I will add a description and I will sign off on this decision. And that will lock in an immutable audit ready record that I can then share with my internal and external audit partners alike. And what I really like about this, again, is extendable with our VEZA actions. And the instant I rejected that access, VEZA created and wrote a remediation ticket into ServiceNow. And in that ticket, I can see, I've got a little bit of a lag here, but I should be able to see, the review name, the decision, the exact entitlement. So now I'll have 2 records. The detection is a field automatically, and the human decision to revoke, both audible, both in your existing ITSM. And it's just having the demo hiccups here. And again, VEZA is also going to help close its own loop. So after the access review is signed off on, it will continuously recheck the graph and auto marks the rows as fixed. So rejected access is no longer detected. However, if it comes back, it'll flip it back to rejected. And again, none of this required replacing your Active Directory, your Azure, your cloud solutions. VEZA connected to them and built the graph. We just gave it a brain. So that concludes the demo portion of this. I'm going to pass it back over to Frank. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Yeah. And that's great. Actually, steal the share back. I'm sure it is right. And I think you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And I didn't know if you wanted to mention anything else, Justin. I think.
No, yeah. I mean, I think I appreciate that, Zach. That was fantastic. And I think just, for the audience in conclusion, right? When you're thinking about VEZA as an identity security platform to augment what you're doing currently, either from a governance perspective or an identity security perspective, and what you just saw in the demo, right, kind of falls under these 3 business problems. One being security posture management. From an identity perspective, we were able to show you how VEZA enhances your visibility into the effective permission layer within your organization, how we can show what your identities can actually do with your data at the resource level. And, this could be for your SaaS applications, your data systems, your on-prem resources. From a next-gen IGA perspective, you saw Zach query and access review, and he even did that for an AI tool, right? So we can do your access review, micro certifications, user access reviews, as well as provide more granular visibility and assign ownership to your non-human identities and your AI agents. Thank you, Frank.
Awesome. No, that was great. And so thank you guys. Yeah. What's interesting, it got me also thinking about it, is because you were specifically showing, Zach, on AI agents, right? And on Bedrock. The one thing we didn't show and we're not planning on show, but we had a separate demo for this, was around AI control tower. So a lot of that data, I think it's later release, and I'm not sure on the actual release, but I think it's this quarter, you'll be able to see that data from AI agents, right? And that access data, being able to bring that into AI control tower. So that's going to be very interesting as well. But, before we move on to the second part of this, I want to run a quick poll on, which identity type is your organization least confident you have full visibility on. So let me do that. Polls. I didn't. And the last ones, I'll stop sharing. Let's go back to the next one. All right. So let's go to poll 2. All right. You guys should see that poll. And so which identity type, as I mentioned, is your organization least confident you have full visibility into, right? A being human identities, B being service accounts and application identities, C being the cloud roles and infrastructure access, and D being kind of what we saw today from Zach, right? AI agents and non-human identities, right? And where you have the least visibility. So I'll keep the poll up for a little bit. Hopefully don't mess it up again. And let's go to part 2. So in this section, I want to talk about what we call the identity security flight path. This is Templar Shield's framework for how organizations actually mature their identity security program. There's not necessarily a vendor roadmap, right? This is our practitioner flight path. And the reason why we call it flight path and instead of roadmap is very specific, right? When you think of a roadmap, you're going on a road trip, you can change that road trip at any time, right? Things can change very quickly. But when it comes to a flight path, you're going from point A to point B. And yes, there are changes you can make, but they're a lot more risky, right? You can make decision to go somewhere else because there's a storm. You can try to bypass a storm, right? But those are critical decisions you're making in your flight path. And we feel the same way as it relates to the decisions you're making on the program, right? Again, not a vendor roadmap. This is not how you should treat that. You're going to go through each of these phases and think of it. And you must start at the beginning, right? Sounds obvious, but you can't just jump into the middle of this flight path and decide that you're going to start implementing your onboarding and offboarding. And I can tell you from my experience, past 24 years, majority of organizations have done that. That's just how traditional IGA has been implemented. Let's onboard, let's offboard, right? A lot of times access reviews are second, they're not as critical, but then become critical later. So this, 6 phases are critical. Now I'm going to name them, right? Discover, and they're obvious, right? Discover, govern, enforce, respond, train, and optimize. As I mentioned, the instruction on the slide here is important. You start at phase 1, right? But here's what's critical too, is that you advance at your own pace. Also, throughout this flight path, you're not necessarily saying that it must be complete for you to move on to the next phase, right? When it comes to visibility, you don't know what you don't know. So you have to start somewhere to be able to get to the next phase. And you may have to go back and reassess your previous phases before you move on to the next one. So the best way to put this is not a transformation mandate, right? Phase 1 is critical. Phase 1 is discover. That's where you build the authorization graph. That's what you saw from Zach. That is where you build this out. And one thing that Justin mentioned is the time to value. It shouldn't take you, a year plus to be able to do that. This is something that is done much quicker, right? You identify your key resources and your key systems, and you build that authorization graph. And what you are doing there, and this is from our own language, right? You're establishing the exposure baseline. Okay. This is where ServiceNow VEZA starts, where we start ServiceNow VEZA engagement, right? Is to establishing the exposure baseline. So I'll repeat it because I think it's important. And this is one of the reasons why when you talk about identity security, it's not just a marketing name, right? We say specifically identity security for that reason. It's not about administration or management, but about bringing identity into the security stack and being able to use that for exposure, to build your exposure baseline is critical. Every phase after that builds on the visibility phase. You cannot enforce what you have not mapped, as I mentioned, right? We do see clients that want to jump into phase 4 or 5, right? For example, in phase 5, you're training, autonomous identity workers. I've already heard from a few customers that we're ready to start figuring this out. Well, you don't want to do that yet. Or you have some customers that are actually asking about, I want to replace my traditional IGA environment because we're not happy with it, right? Well, that's not the approach. Maybe let's understand first what's going on and let's work on that visibility piece first to identify where the gaps are, okay? And this is what we do in an engagement, is to then be able to help you define what are the next steps. And you'll be surprised. You may have, in some cases, the realization that you can coexist, right? So the two paths, path A, coexist. This is the best fit for somebody that's recently implemented an IGA solution, and you have heavy investment on that, and you already have a defined roadmap. You can layer VEZA on top of that with zero workflow disruption, replace snapshot certifications with continuous exposure-aware reviews, something like what you were seeing from Zach. You don't have to replace your current IGA solution or your directories or anything like that, right? You're just going to layer this on top of that. And now you can start governing areas where you may have gaps, your non-human identities that maybe your current IGA solution cannot reach. Those service accounts, those cloud roles, and AI agents. But you also have path V, which is the augment or re-engineer, right? This gets triggered by certification fatigue, right? The inability to govern cloud and AI identities at scale. Risk-aware access requests, exposure-based certifications, right? Your onboarding and offboarding, your JML, right? Joiner Mover Lever automation was built to, it wasn't built to result effective privilege, right? Instead of just figuring attribute mapping. Or the cross-platform separation of duty policies that actually expands multiple systems. You can do that more effectively by leveraging VEZA. But I think what's most important here, right, is that at the end of the day, both paths start the same way. And I'm going to go back to the same thing, right? You need to see what access actually exists. So visibility is that entry point, regardless of which direction you go. And also, it doesn't matter which direction you've taken. If you start through a Coexist model, and as you're going through that model, you realize that it's time to start re-engineering some of the aspects of your identity stack. Well, you can do that, but you don't have to try to boil the ocean from day one. You want to have visibility, understand your exposure, and then build off of that. That's why we call this a fly path. I do want to do one last poll, which I'm going to, sorry if I'm doing this all over the place. So let me launch the next poll and I'll kind of read it off to you all, but didn't have any more commentary. But the last poll is, where does your organization stand today on identity modernization, right? Maybe you have, option, you have an IGA in place and you want to extend it with better visibility. I think that this is probably where a good chunk of organizations may be in, or maybe current IGA is struggling. And it's not the tool. A lot of times it's process, right? And you may be evaluating other alternatives. Instead of going through that trouble, layer visibility on top of that and understand why your IGA solution. You may identify that it's not the solution itself, but it's processes. Maybe you're too early, right? You don't have a formal IGA program, and believe it or not, you're probably ahead the most, because now you can start with visibility and put the right investments on your program ahead of others that probably have already invested heavily in their IGA program, right? So do not feel bad if you don't have a formal IGA program. And maybe you're one of those that just farther along, already working with your continuous controls and automation, and that's awesome. And whoever that is, I would love to talk to you because I want to learn from you as well. So for anybody that responds to you, you'll be hearing from me. So with that said, I'm going to keep the poll a little bit longer. And, I want to thank you. And this is where I want to make things concrete for you. If any part of what you heard today maps to something that your team is dealing with, and that's the conversation we need to have. Templar Shield has done this across regulated industries. We know how to scope a phase one, a visibility phase quickly, and where to find the early wins. And I think that usually, and I can confidently say within the first 30 days, we can understand where your early wins are. Even though an engagement may be a little longer than that for visibility, you can already see in the first 30 days, if we have connectivity to your key systems, you can start seeing some wins and have a good understanding of where you're going. We're not here to sell a program. We're here to help you figure out where you are, right? And what the next practical step looks like in the process. So I would say reach out and let's talk. But before I do that, Justin, Zach, anything else you guys would like to say before we end?
No, I really appreciate it, Frank. Thank you for the partnership. I absolutely agree. The purpose of today's conversation was just to illustrate, the power of the platform and how we partner with the Templar team. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
100%. Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you, Justin and Zach. Great work. And I look forward to talking to all of you in the future. This is being recorded. So like I said, you will be sending this out on how to set for recording later. So thanks so much and have a great rest of the day.